Another night. Welcome, my friend. Do come in. Pay no mind to the clutter. Every object has its story, and most of them are not the sort you were told in school. Tonight, we will not speak of Caesar or the great battles. Those things are so terribly loud. Instead, let us follow a man lost to the dust of time. His name was Lucius, an olive oil merchant from Pompeii, a tidy, quiet city. And this was his first time setting foot in the Eternal City. Through his overwhelmed eyes and his sensitive nose, we will discover something that defined Rome just as much as its legions. We will discover its scent. When Lucius's cart passed through the city gates, the first shock was not visual, but auditory. Listen with him. It was a constant, grinding roar, the sound of nearly 1 million people living, trading, arguing, and existing on top of one another. The iron-rimmed wheels of supply wagons grinding on the cobblestones, the cries of fishmongers, the hammering of a blacksmith, the laughter and the weeping, all blending into a chaotic symphony. Pompeii, his home, suddenly seemed like a silent village. But then he looked up, and he was awestruck. He had never seen such structures. Marble temples that scraped the sky, colossal triumphal arches telling tales of victories in faraway lands, and above all, the grandest structures of all, true palaces for the masses, the public baths, the thermae.
In my hand here is a fragment from an oil flask, an eribalos. It is small, humble. Perhaps it belonged to a man like Lucius. He decided he would do as a visitor should, experience the baths. He chose the baths of Agrippa, one of the oldest and most beloved. Stepping through the gates, the roar of the street vanished, replaced by an entirely different world. He walked through lush gardens, past libraries filled with scrolls, and past the gymnasium where men were wrestling. The sounds of laughter and conversation echoed in the enormous, mosaic-decorated domes. He entered the changing room, the epoditerium. It was crowded and smelled sharply of sweat. He removed his dusty traveling clothes, handed them to a slave, and hoped they would still be there when he returned. Petty theft in the baths was a notorious problem. Another slave, holding a bottle of olive oil, approached. Lucius paid the small fee. The slave began to rub the thick, pungent oil all over his body. Soap, you see, was a barbaric invention of the Gauls. Civilized Romans scraped themselves clean. After being oiled, Lucius had to wait his turn for an alyptos, a professional scraper, to use a curved bronze tool called estrigil to remove the oil and dirt. As the slave scraped Lucius, he looked down at the grey filth being removed and wondered when exactly the strigil had last been washed. Then he began the bathing circuit. He entered the tepidarium, the warm room. The air was pleasant, heated by a complex system under the floor. This was where men gathered to gossip and do business. Lucius overheard a group of merchants complaining about the price of grain from Egypt, while two senators whispered about some political intrigue. Next was the caldarium, the hot room. Stepping inside felt like walking into a wall of steam. The air was thick, hot, difficult to breathe. In the center was a small pool of steaming hot water. He submerged himself, feeling his pores open. But then he saw a man with angry-looking skin sores soaking not far away. Lucius had a sudden realization. The baths, meant to be a symbol of cleanliness, were in fact a warm bacterial soup, a paradise for infectious skin diseases. Finally, to finish, he braved the frigidarium, the cold plunge pool. The icy shock jolted him awake. He felt refreshed, clean, but the feeling would not last. When nature called, Lucius asked for the latrina, and what he saw made the merchant, accustomed to the tidy privacy of Pompeii, stop in his tracks. A large room with long marble benches drilled with holes, set side by side. There were no partitions, no privacy. Using the toilet was a communal activity. You might sit next to a senator, discussing politics while attending to your business. But that was not the most shocking detail. When he was finished, Lucius looked for toilet paper. There was none. Instead, in the corner of the room was a bucket of water, and in it stood a stick with a natural sea sponge attached to the end, the xylospongium, the communal cleaning tool. He watched the man next to him casually use it, give it a quick rinse in a bucket of salt water or vinegar, and place it back. For the next person, a single sponge for dozens, perhaps hundreds of men. Now you understand why dysentery and intestinal parasites were a constant companion in Roman life, don't you?
It is difficult to maintain the dignity of an empire when you must share your toilet sponge, is it not? That, my friend, was just the beginning. Just the public places. Lucius had learned his first lesson about Rome. The magnificent exterior always concealed a raw and sometimes unsanitary reality. And he was about to discover that his nightly lodgings were far, far worse. This is an old Roman key. Perhaps it opened the door to an insulae. An insulae, an island apartment building where Lucius had rented a room. Poets wrote of the 7 hills of Rome, but the people who actually lived there spoke of the thousands of islands built hastily of wood and mud brick. When Lucius found his insulae tucked away in a narrow alley in the Suburra district, Rome's most crowded and infamous quarter, he understood the name. The building soared 7 stories high, blotting out the sky, leaving the alley in shadow, even though the sun had not yet set. The ground floor, which housed shops and a noisy tavern, was built of sturdy brick. But as Lucius climbed the dark, rickety wooden staircase, he could feel the quality of the construction diminish. The walls on the 3rd floor were already cracked. By the 5th floor, where he rented a room, the walls were little more than thin, wooden partitions, hastily covered with plaster. He could hear the arguments of the family next door, the crying of a baby from the floor above. There was no privacy, only proximity. The landlord, a fat man named Balbus, had warned him, "Don't use a brazier in the room, unless you want us all to burn to death. And don't lean on the north wall. I'm not sure how much longer it will hold." Balbus was not joking. The insulae were death traps, built quickly and cheaply by greedy landlords. The historian Livy wrote that the Roman people seemed to fear collapsing buildings and fire more than the enemy. Imagine sleeping, and your bedroom wall suddenly gives way to a terrifying void. Or worse, the entire building collapses like House of Cards, burying dozens of families. Emperor Augustus had to pass a law limiting the height of insulae to 70 Roman feet, but it was a law few obeyed. Profit always won against safety. And if the building didn't collapse and didn't burn that night, life inside was still a challenge. His room was small, just enough for a bed and a chest. No kitchen, no running water, and of course, no private toilet. So what did one do with the waste? This is where life in Rome became truly intimate. One used a chamber pot, and when the pot was full, the simplest and most common option was to open the window and empty it directly into the alley below. Roman law actually had a specific clause for this. If you were hit on the head by the contents of a falling chamber pot, you could sue the person who threw it. The problem was, how could you know which window it came from in a 7-story apartment building in the middle of the night? Most people just cursed and tried to clean themselves off. It is why the wise Roman always walked close to the walls. So the streets of Rome by day were a chaotic mess, crowded, noisy. Listen with Lucius again, not the sound of lyres in a palace, but a constant roar. The grinding of iron wheels on stone from the supply wagons, only allowed in the city at night, but their noise lingered. The sound of 1,000 bargains being struck in dozens of languages.
the cries of a street vendor being chased away, and it was filthy. Garbage, food scraps, animal and human waste. It was all there. But the streets of Rome by night were another world, a dangerous world. Lucius decided to step out for a tavern, a decision he quickly regretted. Rome had no streetlights. When the sun went down, the city plunged into an almost absolute darkness, broken only by the occasional torch outside a rich man's home. That darkness was a haven for all sorts: thieves, drunks, and street gangs. The poet Juvenal wrote satirically that you were a fool to go out at night without having written your will. You could be robbed, you could be beaten, or you could simply be cornered by a group of bored, drunken, aristocratic youths looking for some fun. The night watch, the vigilas, were mostly firefighters. They couldn't be everywhere. Most of the time you were on your own. Lucius kept to the walls, one hand on his coin purse, and quickly retreated to the relative safety of his rickety room. That was the truth of the greatest city in the world. By day, a magnificent stage for power and architecture, but at night it returned to something primal, a place ruled by darkness and fear. A fascinating contrast, is it not? Like a coin.
On one side, the face of the emperor, a symbol of order and law. On the other, chaos, the daily struggle for survival of the common man. And to truly understand Rome, you must look at both sides. Now, let's talk about the thing that helped them survive it all. Let's talk about food. Food, the most basic fuel for the human machine. In Rome, food was more than survival. It was a statement of class, a theater of wealth, and sometimes a dangerous game of health. Lucius, as a merchant, was curious about what the people of this great city ate. I once had the honor of viewing a copy of an ancient Roman cookbook attributed to a gourmand named Apicius. The feasts he described are unbelievable. It was a world of grotesque luxury. They didn't just eat meat, they ate the strangest parts. Flamingo tongues, said to taste like roses. The udders of a pregnant sow, considered a great delicacy. The brains of songbirds, and the ultimate aristocratic snack, dormice, fattened in special pottery jars with nuts and acorns, then stuffed with pork and honey and roasted. A rich man's dinner party, a cena, could last for hours with dozens of courses. And to be able to continue eating, they had a very practical solution. They would retire to a special room called a vomitorium to relieve themselves of everything, then return to the table and begin again with a smile. Such an elegant expression of culture, no? But that was the world of the 1%. What about the other 95%? Lucius's unfortunate neighbors in the insulae. What did their meals look like? The answer is one word: pulse, porridge. Most of Rome's poor survived on the annona, the government's free grain dole. This wasn't charity, it was a political tool to keep the massive, volatile mob fed and quiet. Panem and circenses, that was the formula for rule. Lucius saw them, the common people, waiting in line for hours with their wooden tokens to receive their ration of wheat. They would take these sacks of grain to a miller, pay a small fee, and receive coarse flour. Most insulae apartments had no kitchens, a major fire hazard, so they cooked their porridge on small braziers in the hallways, or simply mixed the flour with water and ate it cold. Sometimes they might add a few vegetables, a little cheese or an olive. Meat was a luxury reserved for festivals. For a hot meal, they would go to the thermopolia, the fast food counters that Lucius also frequented. You could buy a hot bowl of lentil soup, a few sausages or bread dipped in honey, and everything, almost everything, was doused in Rome's signature condiment, garum.
Garum, fish sauce, but not like any you know. It was made by taking fish guts, blood, and small whole fish, mixing them with immense amounts of salt in large vats and leaving them to putrefy in the sun for weeks, even months. The resulting liquid was salty and overwhelmingly fishy, but the Romans adored it. They put it on everything, from savory dishes to even their desserts. To us, it might be a nightmare, but to them, for someone who ate plain wheat porridge day after day, that powerful dash of flavor from garum might be the only highlight of their meal. Of course, with such a diet and such sanitary conditions, illness was inevitable. And when a Roman fell sick, they entered a world of a strange mix of practical observation and deep superstition. Lucius's landlord, Balbus, came down with a fever. A medicus was called. The doctor asked few questions. He declared that Balbus was suffering from an excess of blood, one of the 4 humors that were believed to govern the body. The solution? Remove the excess. Lucius watched in horror as the medicus used a small bronze scalpel to open a vein in Balbus's arm, letting the dark blood flow into a brass bowl, while the patient grew visibly weaker. When the blood runs brighter, the doctor explained confidently, it means the bad blood is gone. Of course, it only made Balbus weaker and more likely to die. They had skilled surgeons, men who could perform complex operations, but they had no concept of germs. They didn't know that their own unwashed hands and unsterilized instruments were the source of deadly infections. You might survive the surgery, only to die of a fever a few days later. And when science failed, the Romans turned to the gods. Balbus's wife, seeing her husband failing, hurried to the temple of Aesculapius, the god of healing. She carried a terracotta offering shaped like a liver, hoping the god would cure her husband. She believed in protective amulets, in magical incantations, and in healing dreams sent from the divine. That was daily life in Rome, as Lucius saw it. A constant tug of war between grandeur and filth, between order and chaos, between science and superstition. And that, my friend, is the real boredom of history. It is not found in the battles. It is found in the quiet daily struggle, the fight against germs they could not see, against the collapse of the building they lived in, and against the very food they put in their mouth. That was the greatest war of all. The fire is fading, and so is our story of Lucius's journey. Look out the window of this library. Imagine you are looking out over the rooftops of ancient Rome under the moonlight. From a distance, it looks so peaceful, does it not? But now you and I know what is happening within those walls. The families crowded in their dark rooms, the sick moaning, the healthy praying they will see tomorrow's sun. It is so human, and that perhaps is the most fascinating thing of all. Now let those images dissolve. Let the sounds of the ancient city fall silent. There is nothing left to analyze, only the stillness of the night. Let that stillness surround you. Let the heaviness of sleep pull you down. You have traveled a long way tonight. It is time to rest. Sleep well.